For more on this, we're joined by former U.S. Labor Secretary Robert Reich. He's currently the Chancellor Professor of Public Policy at the University of California at Berkeley. Mr. Reich also has a new film called Inequality for All and has recently spoken out a lot about this issue. Good to see you again, Professor. Good to have you back on the show. This situation in China, a lot of people are pointing fingers at a lot of other people. What's your take on how serious this is and how guilty J.P. Morgan may or may not be?
Well, remember, J.P. Morgan is the largest bank in the United States, the largest bank on Wall Street, and it does set the trend. I mean, its business practices are very important in terms of what other big banks do and what other American corporations do. And the allegation here is that J.P. Morgan did go over the line in terms of providing favors to prospective business clients. Those favors took the form of jobs for the children of the elite in China, the Communist Party elite, and that could very well violate something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which was designed exactly to prevent big American corporations from offering anything of value that might create corruption, that might generate business because it was given to the families or the individuals who are in positions of power, official power, crossing the line between what is a business practice, a legitimate business practice, and what is considered to be bribery or corruption.
Secretary Reich, you served under Secretary Clinton as the Labor Secretary. I want to ask you, a lot of people say it's not a definite right or wrong. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to introducing, whether it's my daughter or son, to you and say, could you perhaps look into seeing if there's an internship available, versus the fact of A causing B directly, for example, a new banking contract. Where do we draw the line?
Oh, well, that's exactly the question. Where should the line be drawn? I mean, there is a lot of influence in the United States exercised by very large banks on the administration in Washington, on Congress. We have a revolving door between some of the largest banks and the Treasury Department in terms of high Treasury Department officials then getting jobs on Wall Street in very large banks just like J.P. Morgan. There is a tradition in the United States of big banks even providing big campaign contributions and all sorts of other favors to Washington luminaries, members of Congress, and also people of the administration. Now, again, those are constrained. There are limits on that. You can't actually bribe a member of Congress with actual money, but you can, if you're a big company, provide a great deal of money to the campaign committees that are designed to re-elect the member of Congress. Now, what's bribery? What's corruption? There's not a domestic Corruption Act in the United States. There is a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, not a domestic Corrupt Practices Act in America. So we don't have quite the same standard for, let's say, a large American bank and what it does to influence Washington.
Secretary Reich, you've worked in Washington for a while. You know how the game works. I've spent some time with some folks up in New York on Wall Street. It's sloppy. Look, it's you introduce your friends to me and I introduce my friends to you and we work out a deal and maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't work out, but there's a lot of patting each other on the back, and some would argue this is how it's been done since the beginning of business deals. Why are we talking about this right now? What's happened?
Well, we're talking about it for a number of reasons. Number one, because although this is done all the time in the private sector, that is, if I'm a big business and I want your business, I might hire your son and daughter, and I might, give you all sorts of advantages. But when you have the relationship between business and government is a little bit more delicate. In fact, it's far more delicate. Right now, we have large businesses after a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United against the Federal Election Commission, which basically said, okay, big businesses are like people. They have First Amendment protections under the Constitution. They can spend as much money as they want influencing politics. Well, a lot of people are very uncomfortable about that. That may violate a very fundamental principle of democracy, which is individuals should be heard, and big companies and a lot of money should not have more influence than individuals. So when you're dealing with democracy and the fundamental principle of democracy, you don't want to necessarily cross the line between business and government.
Speaking of democracy, you were recently here in Washington, and I imagine you had a few words to discuss regarding the U.S. budget that recently passed the House and is now being considered for renewal. There's something in a budget that basically offends everyone, it seems like. I just wanted to get your take. I know some of the statements you've made on the websites and other news organizations, but I wanted to get your view on whether you thought this budget was good for the long term of the United States.
Well, let's put it this way. It's probably a step in the right direction in terms of bipartisanship and getting some control over the budget and having real budgets. But it's a very small step. This is a very modest step. In fact, it's a sign of how low Americans' expectations are for Congress to work out a deal, that this very minor deal has been hailed as an example of bipartisanship.
You've gone on the record about inequality. You've gone on the record about poverty, the war on poverty. If you were in Washington today, what would your guidance for solutions be to the leaders here?
Well, I would invest more in education, particularly for people of families from modest means, from lower middle class, what we used to call the working class, and the poor. I would certainly make it possible for people to get a wage that is a living wage, that enables them to have a roof over their heads and clothing and food and the kind of basics and basic necessities they need. So I would raise the minimum wage, expand the earned income tax credit, which is a wage subsidy for very poor workers. And in order to finance better education and more opportunities for children of modest means, I would probably recommend raising taxes on the wealthy, who in the United States have never been wealthier. In fact, the gap between the wealthy and the poor, and even the middle class and the wealthy, has not been this great since the late 19th century.
Professor and Secretary Reich, I want to thank you for your time live for us in San Francisco. We're going to continue this conversation another time, but fascinating comments. Thanks you very much. We're going to